use the AI study.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming to this site plan review committee for the Inn of Rosslyn. We will be holding a hybrid public meeting which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7th, 2022. Members of the SPRC subgroup for the Inn of Rosslyn project are participating both here in person and virtually through electronic means. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics.
People never do.
Tonight's meeting will run.
And here's the other thing, just keep in mind.
Members of the,
Anything with Trump, I need to be on that.
I agree with you, Lauren.
members of the, at this time, I'd like to orient you, members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the SPRC webpage, the project webpage, the county's events calendar, and the email notification sent to the SPRC email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our subgroup members joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. I will address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active to serve two purposes: for SPRC subgroup members who need technical assistance, and for members of the public to add their names to the list for public comment, which will be taken at the end of the meeting. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion. Those who were planning to provide public comment will still need to do so at the end of the meeting, as the chat will not serve as that opportunity. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public comment period. We are going to sort of take attendance, call the roll here. The SPRC roster was put together a couple of years ago, Peter. So we think we have some changes in it. So give us a little patience as we record the names. I'm Peter Robertson of the Planning Commission and chair of this SPRC subgroup.
I'm Peter Schultz with the Arlington County Planning Division.
Sergio Berbicheo, Principal Planner for Development Services Bureau.
Jim Lantelme, Planning Commission.
Leslie Arminsky, Rave Farm.
Alex Foster, HALRB.
Tony Strider, I'm with the Planning Commission.
Emily Peters, Planning Commission.
Nick Cummings, Ladies Attorney for the applicant.
Josh Olson, Monument Realty, the applicant.
Jasna Bielic with Davis Scott Architects.
Curtis Roulette, Associate Planner, CPG, HD.
Doug Carter, Davis Scott Architects.
Just Washington Associate representing the applicant.
Tyler Fink, Studio 39 Landscape Architecture.
Hana Dugama, Davis Scott Design.
Jeff Preps from Blanket.
One thing, if I could ask if everybody could speak up a little more, because the microphones are above us. Sometimes people online can't hear us. We do have to acknowledge Alex Foster is the original, so Alex Foster will be HLRB, right? Okay.
Thank you.
And then once we do that, let's go with the SPRC members online. You can feel free to turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves. And, see Joan.
Joan McIntyre, representing the Climate Change, Energy and Environment Commission.
Do we have any other committee or commission representatives online?
I'm Eric Goodman. I'm representing the Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Okay. And then Alex, I think. Mavridis, or Aiden, I'm sorry, Aiden.
Hi, yes, Aiden Muradovich from the Transportation Commission. I'm filling in for Sohail Hussein, who was the original liaison but wasn't able to attend tonight. So I'm happy to be here, at least virtually. Wish I was able to be there in person.
Thank you.
Thank you. We recognize you as the Transportation Commission representative.
I think everybody else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, introductions, and we have a staff presentation.
Oh, it looks like we have a representative from the Disability Advisory. Ms. Prohl, feel free to introduce you. We just did introductions of the virtual people on SPRC. You can.
Okay, I'm sorry to be late. I am Elizabeth Prio. I'm the representative for the Disability Advisory Commission.
Elizabeth, we recognize you as the representative of the Disability Advisory Commission. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
You. Members of the public, you'll have the opportunity for public comment at the end for people who are not members of this commission, members of a committee, I should say, members of Arlington advisory commissions. Do you want to go ahead with our staff presentation?
Ready for the
All
staff
right,
presentation.
ready for the staff presentation. Our topics tonight are sort of the first half of our usual SPRC meeting. We think this will be enough discussion tonight. But I'm going to give you a little background on the planning history of this site because many of our planning commissioners and other commission members may not have been around at the time when the Fort Myer Heights North plan was adopted. We have here 1601 Fairfax Drive. It is parallel to Arlington Boulevard. The site, as you can see, is on the, it is not in Rosslyn. Rosslyn is across Pierce Street, or no, it's, yes, I think Rosslyn is. Anyways, this area is within what's called the Fort Myer Heights North sector plan. The general land use plan, which is how make our land use planning decisions, designates this site as medium residential. And as you can see, it's actually officially designated on the plan as far. It's not a sector, it's Fort Myer Heights North Special District. And the zoning district is RA 615. There's also a little bit of S3A zoning, which I'll speak about in a second why that is. There is a rezoning application, a part of this. There is, the county has determined unnecessary right-of-way for Fairfax Drive. That is an artifact of when it was once a streetcar line. We do not need that. And in fact, currently, a segment of that right-of-way is actually being occupied by the parking lot of the existing motel and a retaining wall. So it's about 2,800 square foot of right-of-way. The developer, in order to meet the build-to lines required to be on Fairfax Drive, as you'll see in the plans that we adopted for this neighborhood, we want to sort of prevent frontage on Fairfax Drive behind the sidewalks. The sidewalks here will be a lot wider than current sidewalks. We'll vacate and purchase from the county this unneeded right-of-way. It'll be at market rates and vacated and incorporated into the site so they can build the proposed structure. The plan for this neighborhood is this, the Fort Myer Heights North plan. I called it a sector plan, and that's, I'm sorry, for our metro corridors. This is slightly out of the metro corridor. It is an area plan adopted in 2008 after several years of discussion and study, including significant changes that were made in those years to our affordable housing policies and laws requiring affordable housing in plans and zoning ordinance. I'm not going to read this all, but the overarching vision and goals of these plans is preservation of existing affordable dwelling units, which we admittedly don't have on this site, and I'll speak to that later, and the construction of new affordable units. Other things, provisions of public and private open spaces, and as I alluded to before, an improved neighborhood edge and pedestrian-oriented streetscape along Fairfax Drive and Clarendon Boulevard. And you do see that in some of the relatively recent new buildings that have been along Fairfax Drive, constructed in the last few years. The zoning ordinance was then amended in order to accomplish the goals of this plan. And again, the developer can, under the existing zoning, apply for a site plan with density above what normally RA 615 permits, which is 72 units an acre. However, where the goals of the plan are addressed. which includes, among other things, affordable housing, the provision of, again, open spaces identified in the plan, and significant trees, of which there are no significant trees on this. And then finally, another county policy that affects this site is the historic resources inventory. It's adopted several years after that area plan. The area plan did not designate this site as a historic resource to be saved. What they did identify, and I'll show you this later, were historic garden apartments from the 1930s and 40s that were in the northern area of this plan, closer to Clarendon Boulevard. However, the historic resources inventory was adopted by the county board. It is official county policy. This site is considered important and in the top 1/3 category of important structures. Well, what do important structures mean? It means strive to protect and promote the reuse of important sites. It does not say, though, however, preservation at all costs. Items in this category, though, are required to go to the HALRB for review. The Historic Affairs and Landmark Review Board do not have voting up or down power, or in other words, they do not grant a COA for this certificate of appropriateness, but they are expected to give their feedback and review, and the developer is expected to take that feedback seriously in order to make this compatible with the neighborhood. Our first subject is land use and density in this neighborhood, and I want to introduce you to the concept plan. In this concept plan, there are two areas in Fort Myer Heights North, and the light brown area is a conservation district. This is where most of the oldest garden apartments from the World War II era were built, or even before. This area was meant to preserve its garden apartment character, preserve market rate affordable units that exist there. Unfortunately, much fewer than there were when the plan. This plan was largely done as a response to development pressure in the neighborhood, where by right, many older apartment buildings were taken down and newer condominium buildings and newer townhouse developments were built by right. Again, the county has by right development, which means if it meets the zoning, every letter of the zoning ordinance, then we cannot deny them a permit. There's special exception development, which is what the SPRC handles. That's development that's above and beyond zoning ordinance. It needs modifications from it in some cases. So it's preservation of their tree canopy, the character, et cetera. However, to help preserve that northern area, there was also, they had transfer of development rights, a program developed for this neighborhood, although I think it's only been used in Wakefield Manor. There is a redevelopment district that was designated, an area where high intensity development and high rise development was anticipated. And in this area, it was along Fairfax Drive and Arlington Boulevard. Now, there were many reasons for that, including it's the lowest points of the site. It won't interfere with views to Washington and stuff like that. It's right next to arterial streets. There's fewer, at the time, it was determined there were fewer historic resources to preserve. And you see our current site here on the edge of the district between Pierce and Queen Streets, right in that redevelopment. They also call it a boulevard zone with some special, designs to provide an urban frontage along Fairfax Drive. Among other things, though, this plan was both in the conservation district and in the revitalization area meant to provide public and private open spaces and improve tree canopy coverage. And that will become important when we talk later. Again, here's the density plan. As you notice in this conservation area, lower densities, higher densities allowed where they wanted the redevelopment, which was in that redevelopment district. Same thing, the highest height, building heights, 12 stories, are permitted right here in this redevelopment zone area. Now, there was also specific block by block guidance of sites that were likely to redevelop at some point in the future. There were two alternatives for this particular site. This is block 6, so where this motel currently is block 6. Alternative A was that the site was entirely consolidated for redevelopment, and that 3 of the historic garden apartments were built in a larger building that spanned the Fairfax Drive frontage with tapers to the garden apartments to be would be encouraged to be constructed. However, we understand that all that was in separate ownership. What really happened, and so we did develop an alternative B, was that separate development. The motel would develop separately from the affordable housing development to the north. And that's in fact what we had today. To the north is the Pierce Queen development by what was called APA back then, about 10, 15 years ago. They did preserve a couple of the historic buildings, but this site was not consolidated with the rest. So the guidance for this alternative B was that if the southern portion of the block is redeveloped independently, a substantial landscape green space should be provided on site. The proposed development we have, the developer will tell you more, is an 8-story residential building with 142 units, 5.6 FAR, and 85 parking spaces. We want to get the compact spaces down, and we're working with them on that. I think we made procedures. It is stick over concrete construction, which is why it's limited to 8 stories. So as we analyze its land use and density in Fort Myer Heights North, again, there is a conservation and redevelopment are anticipated. And this is all anticipated really to be residential. This is not intended to be a major mixed use retail area or for instance, so the developer is providing us a residential use with no retail, which is fine, permitted in the plan. We like to have retail concentrated in areas where there's already existing retail. The goals of the community will be realized in this revitalization area. Targeted redevelopment, it says up to 3.2 FAR. This was back in a time when there was a hard cap on all densities in the county. There was very limited room for bonus density for LEED and for affordable housing. About 5 years ago, the county board removed the density caps however, again, development is expected to adhere to design guidelines within that extra FAR. So not just anything goes, the other plans and goals are meant to be, but it is no longer a hard cap of 3.2 FAR. And again, open spaces identified in the plan must be provided. Well, it does say public open space. This area is was not intended to have a public space. It was not designated on the plan. There are triangles here for where public open space. It's like a park right here, I think, by the larger development along. I don't remember what that was called, and then if this were ever to redevelop a public space up here, I don't believe that has redeveloped at this time. So this open space that was anticipated for the southern half of the block in alternative B, which is what we have, was a private space. So analyzing it, and as I mentioned, the highest densities and heights are into this area. For the intended density, the development is compatible. 5.5 FAR is a good density for this site. It is residential use, and the use is residential. Retail was optional. There is no retail provided here, and we cannot. I do not think it is a good idea to make them do retail here. 3.24 FAR and up, the area plan goals are met, and for provision of site amenities per ACZ. This is what we call AKA community benefits. They are expected as part of the base site plan, 20% of the density above 1.65 FAR must be devoted to committed affordable housing units. That's written into the zoning ordinance. Now they have density above the 3.2 FAR methods. Of course, staff's question and that we want to have the SPRC give us feedback on is, are the goals of the plan being met, and is plan consistent with the design guidelines? Maximum 12 stories is permitted. The developer is proposing 8 stories. Site design and layout for open space, our other next topic of discussion. Building facades are meant to be at a relatively behind the sidewalk. And the developer is providing that. We have the cross section for Fairfax Drive that we want a multimodal cross with that. We can also provide upgraded sidewalks. Loading is meant to be on the side streets and parking, and the developer has indeed provided that, as you'll see in their plans. And again, just a refresher of what the block is intended to look like if the motel develops separately, as in this case. showing the site design and layout. And with that open space goes hand in glove with this. And the plan is very clear that there needs to be some sort of landscaped open space on this site. We can leave it open as to how big. It's merely an illustration on the illustrative, and whether even the location perhaps could be on. But right now, because of, as the developer will tell you, that the way the site works, the constraints, they would not be able to provide more than the landscaping that they have now. So we have a ground floor with a lobby at the corner of Fairfax Drive and North Pierce Street, which is consistent with the plan. Parking entrance is off of Pierce Street. That's consistent with the plan. Transformers are going to be above ground, as seems to be typical today. We need them to be the urban design done well, that they are screened appropriately, and more or less do not negatively affect the pedestrian experience. We have dwelling units here a bit on Queen Street, then the loading. Dwelling units also along Fairfax Drive too. That is perfectly acceptable. Again, our guidance for open spaces on private property is that it should evoke the garden element of the garden apartment concept and the traditional style of using lawns and landscaped areas to frame buildings. As you can also, private open spaces should be as generally depicted in the illustrative examples and planted in a manner keeping with the aesthetic. Site designs should also reflect the garden apartment aesthetic. You should avoid fenced or wall types of open space. So again, we have here the property is behind the sidewalk. It is occupying the vast majority of its site. We have the units on the ground floor over here. We have the lobby at the corner of Fairfax and Pierce. When we talk about architecture, you can also see there's above the fourth level, there is a terrace. And that's another item that we would like feedback from the SPRC on, is that, well, the current site has no landscaping. So what the developer is proposing is, an improvement on what the current site is doing now. We will get street trees with the proposal, although there are some questions whether the trees that are being offered might meet our tree canopy goals. We encourage the developer to work with our forestry to work on that. There are green roof areas, and then this terrace area, which is about 110 feet wide, and at its most about 30 feet deep. We have been consistent at stating to applicant that the lack of open space is a serious deviation from the area plan, and that it doesn't have to be a specific size. The illustration is just an illustration. The location can be flexible, but it should meet any of these guidelines that have been adopted by the board in this plan. For building form and architecture, we've been working with the applicant has been very cooperative with us in trying to juggle many things, which is trying to balance neighborhood compatibility, honoring the sort of semi-late Art Deco design of the building surrounding it, and also the fact that now the motel is considered an important resource in our historic resources. So the developer has been working with us, and we'll go to the HLRB in the future to have the design reviewed by them. There is one issue that we would like feedback from the SPRC, and that's there is a recommendation that there be a 15-foot, at least 15-foot step back starting at the fourth floor along Fairfax Drive. Notwithstanding the urban edge intent of Fairfax Drive, that's for the ground level. Our plans do recommend a 15-foot step back. So the terrace is offered here. Again, it's about 110 feet wide, so slightly about 2/3 of the way of the width of the building, and it does get as deep as 30 feet. So we would like the SPRC's feedback on and feelings about that. And there's also overhangs into easement areas, and this is largely to provide finally a little bit of floor area for the uses. They will not intrude into county property. They will be over easements. They're 21 to 23 feet above street level. And it's largely because of stick construction, which is kind of unforgiving for floor plates and step backs. Whoops. We have worked with the applicant to reduce these overhangs, but we still think combined with, is this an issue for the SPRC? Staff believes that with this step back area to work with the applicant on this, and we may come to an agreement on this. But the overhangs may also intrude onto the street trees, again, which is an item brought up by the Urban Forestry Commission. So, or I should say, our staff urban foresters, not the commissioners. So our public process and schedule. Right now, we have this SPRC meeting scheduled. We have scheduled a second SPRC meeting. I'd like to hear your feedback, especially on the open space issues. We did have an online engagement 2 years ago. The developer will tell you that they go back what they had proposed at the time was not economically feasible, and they've come back with what they feel is a more feasible project. Also with actually, we're happy with less parking, and they will be able to tell you about that. But right now, we have not scheduled a second SPRC because we would like to hear feedback. So, and this is all posted on the webpage with our contact information. Thank you.
I want to be efficient, so I'm just going to launch right in as we bring up our presentation, because the first 2 slides are really just the building location and then a summary that Peter basically went over. Peter's presentation was thorough. It was mostly fair, so thank you very much for that. Also, thank you to the planning commissioners who came tonight so that we have a quorum. Obviously, you guys are really busy, and I think that it's clear that some of you all might be tired, and so we don't have a full attendance that we would always have, but I appreciate those who did come. Like Peter said, we first filed the application in early January of 2023. It's accepted. We had the first SPRC meeting, which was that engagement session. We had a virtual walking tour, and all of that concluded by April of 23. By that point, and so our building, of course, is the lighter shade, the white building. The gray behind it is Union on Queen that we had to kind of render in because of Google Maps. But you can see, roughly the location in relation to the downtown core and to the structures surrounding it. But following the meeting in 2023, we encountered some significant challenges. One of them was bedrock beneath the site that really starts on our first level of parking. Bedrock, of course, very expensive and difficult to excavate, can lead to the need for blasting and other things like that, which are not only disruptive, but an enormous impact on any project. We also encountered economic headwinds that everyone's aware of, rising interest rates, labor costs, materials costs, all of this, coming right at the same time that rents are skyrocketing too, which is just really tough, that it's more and more difficult for us to bring the kind of supply on board that I think the community needs to help at least stem the growth of those rents. But, we're facing just enormous costs that make it very difficult to build anything. Today, so we went back, we redesigned the project. It's to make it more economic. We're betting that within a few years it is going to work financially, but quite frankly, right now it still doesn't. Now, that being said, OJ notwithstanding, whatever the heck you want to call it, what happened yesterday, and its continuing effects on all of us notwithstanding, we are hoping to see further improvement in the cost environment. That by the time we hit 2026, if we can get a buildable building approved at this stage, then we can actually build. And after that careful redesign, et cetera, we were able to resubmit in November of this year. We got back through some staff comments, have been working very constructively on a number of things. And that essentially brings us to today. I don't need to go over too much more of the building before Yasna speaks. We're demolishing the existing hotel, et cetera, et cetera. Peter reviewed the parking. I wanted to point out, we do have 85 spaces. The legal parking ratio will likely be as low as a 0.4. That's to reduce our compact ratio and essentially leave a lot of the extra compact parking spaces as surplus parking that is really on us to manage. It's not something the county is requiring. Those spaces exist because of the difficulty of designing this garage on this tiny site, and with excavating all that bedrock, that we're just in a position where we wanted to provide as much parking as we could within that level, but it just wasn't possible to provide all standard spaces. So we're confident that we can manage those with our tenants, and that folks who have cars that can fit into those spaces will be the ones who end up leasing them. From a community benefits and other sort of site amenities perspective, we are proposing several on-site affordable units. As Peter said, the sector plan and the zoning ordinance require us to provide that percentage of the density between a 1.65 and a 3.2 on site. That comes out to, I want to say, between 7,000 and 8,000 square feet. How exactly that would be divided will be something we'll talk to staff and housing about. It could be almost 8 units if they're all 1 bedrooms. That's not the case. We usually end up with a mix. So exactly the number of units, I'm not sure. That would be under standard county policy, 60% AMI, 30 years. That's what the dedication would be. We are participating in the county's Green Building Incentive Program at the 0.25 FAR level. That includes LEED Gold certification and a number of other components, including energy efficiency, bird-friendly glass, those sorts of things. We addressed that the existing building was not marked for preservation under the sector plan. It was identified under the HRI. That is something that has occurred with just a number of sector plans, and it is a pet policy issue of mine, having dealt with it a number of times, that we have these sector plans that go through years and years and years of review, come up with a very specific list of properties that they want to preserve, and then the HRI did a separate review that was not at all looked at in concert with any of the sector plans and identified a number of buildings as having historic value. Of course, that is board approved policy, like Peter said. We are working on a preservation strategy with staff. One component of it that we think would be fun. You'll see it in Yasmin's presentation, but there's a very large sign that says 1601 down there. It's made of concrete. It's way too big to preserve at all in its existing state, but we can make a model of it that's much smaller, use that as a placard, as some interpretation method for the site. We're also working on including some nods to that through the building design. I'll note before I hand it over to Yasna, because I think it came through in Peter's presentation, we're dealing with a recommendation that on one side on Pierce, we have a garden apartment aesthetic with a substantial landscape open space that quite frankly we can't afford to provide. We have Art Deco as an important influence on the site. We're preserving a mid-century modern building as well. So we have 3 competing design influences, none of which necessarily work together. You throw on top of that on Fairfax, we absolutely have to be up against the street edge. We weren't previously. We had to come up to it to meet it for staff's recommendations. But then on the other side, we're supposed to be set back even further. It all kind of leads to this Frankenstein's monster of different influences. But I think the Goslin's done a beautiful job striking a balance on that. We can wait for discussion. I have other points I can bring in on the open space and some other issues, but I think Peter at least sort of fairly framed what the topics of discussion probably should be.
Sure. So I'm Yasna Bielic. I'm senior designer with Davis Carter and lead designer for this building. I'm practicing architecture for decades. And one thing that you have to appreciate about architecture that is not always solving more than one problem at a time. So it's almost, you have 15 questions that are coming from all the sides, from different levels of authority, from the client, from the county, from the builder. And you have only one answer. You have only one building that has to come with an elegant solution and convince everybody that we are doing exactly what they ask for. So this is the site. It's you can see it's relatively difficult. It's challenging site for residential building. It's triangular shape. It's a little bit small to fit enough units and compete on the market. It has very steep side streets. So Queen and Pierce, their actually slope exceeds 8%, so they're not accessible streets by today's standards. And then you have a very busy 6-lane highway, so there is no access from Fairfax Drive. And so all the service, all the access to the building has to be provided on those 2 side streets. This is existing motel. It's Motel 50. It has emotional value. It's sitting there. I mean, maybe not, but it's sitting there for a long time. I think neighborhood is going to feel good to have new building there that is not. Right now, this is abandoned. It's dark. It's empty. It doesn't feel safe, and it's falling apart. So at the same time, so you can basically memorize here, like there are certain elements that we kind of try to preserve and propose in our new design to keep the story going. We took the color of the brick, we took the stone base of the motel. We did similar configuration of the corner lobby and entrance. And then one of the biggest inspiration is, of course, Sign 50. So with all the challenges on the site, it's actually a great location. This building has extreme exposure, very long views approaching from east and west. 1,000 cars every day are going to pass that building, and they have to experience this building driving 55 miles an hour. That's what we wanted to achieve. And fortunately, we are fortunate enough to see that this little motel actually was appealing to the drivers that were passing 55 or 50 miles an hour. This big sign will get your attention. So this was one of the inspiration of our design. So we go next slide. And this is just showing it is in the context, all these long views, like all these cars coming, that yellow dot is our building. So, and not only that there are long views to the building, there are long views from the building. The building is in the close vicinity of downtown Arlington. It's 5 minutes drive from CEO Canal, from Potomac River, from Georgetown waterfront. And when we were doing all these renderings, we actually realized that from the top floors, you can see Washington Monument. So it's, and that was really achieved with geometry of the building too. So if you see the next slide. So this big, we call it off-white masonry walls that are slicing the building. They are inspired by the King on Route 50, you know, so they're kind of pointing into this long corridor, like vision corridor, so you can kind of you can open the view to the east and to the west. At the same time, they're delineating this residential terrace on the 4th floor, which is facing the park, like Fort Myers Heights Park opposite of us along Route 50. So when you are driving, this is going to get your attention. And at the same time, these stark sculptural elements are framing the reveal in the middle that is more, way softer, it's warmer color, it's architectural wood-like paneling, and the balconies. So we call them signature corners or towers. You can recognize that the building is very horizontal, but these are vertical elements. And we have 3 signature towers, 2 from the approaching from the east and 1 from the east and 1 approaching from the west, that we are trying to be recognizable. You have the balconies that are basically, they have a railing that is echoing the zigzag railing on the motel. And we hope like this wall is kind of a same, like structurally looks similar to big sign. You know, it's cantilevered from the building. These are these overhangs that we would really like to preserve as a main element of design. And then, and you will see like in the close-up renderings, we are really trying to reflect the stone base of hotel, the railing of hotel, the corner entrance, and so on. And lastly, like we really want to have a building that is friendly, that is inviting. So we care about pedestrian experience. Even though like we are adding trees and we have a tight streetscape, we did move the building additional just less than 5 feet along piers, and then we move it even additional 4 feet to provide more green. So and we are working with staff, county staff to provide more defined detailing on the building, but it's already there. So you can see very strong sculptural building, and it's softened up with we would say Art Deco elements. And these are like these flag poles. These are all metal, ornamental metal elements that are going to be adorning the corners, which are very important for us. Then you have like a frieze of little ornamental metal medallions on the top. that repeats itself along the pedestrian level of about the first level and continues in this big entrance canopy that kind of engages this entrance. So if we go further,
And do you know how many more slides you have?
so we are gonna pass now. This
Okay.
is like, that's like one of the, so we have slides, but this is residential terrace, and you can keep going, Jessica. So this is just the same story approaching from the west. And you can see, like, I just want to emphasize that it does create harmony with the building next door. So it's almost, they were developed at the same time. Unfortunately, they were not. So I think if you keep going, I think Peter actually presented the same image, but you can see the green. We are cutting the building along green to provide the green buffer. We are cutting it, we are moving it from the piers and then widening up along the lobby and the leasing offices to provide from green. We are really trying to make it green. And then if you keep going, there are trees on the second level. Then there is next one. There is landscape terrace on the fourth level. And finally, there is green roof on the roof. So it's a small site. It was hard to fit the building, but yeah, we got the message. It has to be as much green as possible. And now this is the section it's showing the bedrock that actually forces us to take the garage out of the grate. And keep going. Same elevations, so I won't really spend too much time on that. So then, keep going. So now this is just to show like pedestrian level. This is what you have today. No landscape, very narrow sidewalks, everything steep, all asphalt. So this same corner, like if you click, this is what we are envisioning there. So when you're walking down Pierce Street, we move the building like 8 feet from the sidewalks to create these stepping planters. And if you keep clicking, and then this is our entrance. So you can see the leasing offices like up on piers. And then this corner actually reflects today's motel. Like the whole proportions of the big green, like a storefront, it's exactly like motel in proportions. I don't know exactly height, but it's kind of squarish shape, which is asymmetrically divided. And then the green actually steps in, and you can see like these stepping planters are now inside. And this is very transparent glass is going to be present on the street. And the big columns that are supporting these walls, we see as some kind of mosaic, like a very small mosaic, like Art Deco element, very popular. So this is our terrace in the evening. And this is our last slide to put this in the context. You can see our building, that white volume at the end. That's really not threatening anybody. It's fitting in perfectly. So now we are ready.
Okay, thank you. Our topics for discussion this evening are land use and density, including unit mix, site design and layout, open space and landscaping, and building height, form, and architecture. So we will have not scheduled yet, but we will have a second meeting to discuss other issues like parking, transportation, et cetera. So if you can try to keep your discussion, your questions to these three topics, we appreciate it. We'll have, maybe not quite 20 minutes on each of those topics, and it's not a problem if we don't take it all. But we do want to preserve some time for public comment because we have people that want to speak. So opening up the discussion to land use and density, including unit mix. Are there questions, comments, concerns from anyone here in the room on that issue? This may go faster than we thought. Commissioner Strine.
So mine's more of a quick comment. I know that we're doing the minimum with affordable housing, but this is the response that we have for the commission more is always appreciated. It's in the plan, it's in a lot of our goals.
Yeah.
More affordable housing.
We are earning some density, like Peter said, above a 3.24 FAR that will require some other community benefit. Because we're already doing on-site units to meet that zoning ordinance and sector plan requirement, it would make a ton of sense to earn the rest of that density with additional on-site units. And we've been clear about that in our documents that we filed. That'll just come down to a discussion with staff closer to the end of review as we figure out exactly what that package is going to be. But it should not be a particularly difficult conversation, in my view. It's a matter of just matching up the value of that remaining bonus density to the value of the subsidy, agreeing to some extent on, what rents will be one day and what the value of that subsidy is. And then we should be able to figure that out. Highly likely that happens.
And the other piece of it too is that, the diversity within that, 30% to 60% AMI is something that we also push for, is not just 60, anything you can put on that is always appreciated. Formal comment, but it's usually something we always say. So I thought I would say.
Fun would also agree.
Yeah, it's up to staff. I think we'd be open to it. It's just typically everything's at 60% AMI, but absent a subsidy, it is difficult to do those 30%, and that would end up, you would get fewer units. It's a conversation we can have.
Can you speak to, were you saying the area plan calls for more affordable housing in this spot?
Not in this particular one, no. It's the zoning ordinance requires them to have affordable housing for the density between 1.65 and 3.214%, and then they'll need to earn more. But it's not, this particular site is not designated for more affordable housing than anything else in the redevelopment district. Again, the intent of the redevelopment district in that area plan was to have the highest heights and densities and most intense development provide us affordable housing too. But this site isn't, singled out in particular.
I think I'll submit for consideration that is one element of the sector plan we are knocking out of the park because we're doing it and we're willing to do more for the community benefit package.
Anyone else?
I'm interested in the fact that we're going for fewer stories than is allowed. And we keep seeing that, last week there was a similar project. We of course would love more housing and density when it's really close to metro. I understand there's the financial considerations. And the legislation in Richmond just got updated, so we're not automatically extending site plans anymore. So I'm just interested, you're like taking a risk as it is about what the financing is going to be in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
But then you're not willing to take the extra risk of going the full 12 stories. So I'd love to hear more about.
Yeah, and I'll answer first and then Josh can back me up as needed. But it is first off, just the cost of materials and the construction type being much less expensive, which allows us to potentially be able to build this project flat out. If you went to steel and concrete with 12 stories, you would need to add a significant amount of density, but the rent from those additional units is still not going to justify the construction cost. Also, with the bedrock beneath the site, we would need to dig into the bedrock of those units. I'm not saying that we would need to park them at one per unit or something, but to provide them a parking ratio that would be appropriate for this site, this distance to the metro, and still lease those, we would need to dig more parking. So it's an economic calculus that's just not going to happen. And unfortunately, that is a common story that we're seeing. And I personally wish that steel and concrete construction was much less expensive. I'm sure that Josh wishes it was too. And I think that it would be nice if a lot of these projects could provide even more housing and be even bigger, but it's just not realistic. And I don't honestly see that changing anytime soon. It is more likely that we get to a place in Arlington where we survive these job losses, we survive this administration, and we have a vibrant enough market that we're still seeing rents that could justify this project. That's realistic. It's not realistic to think that a 12-story steel and concrete building is going to make any sense. I think we even heard this, and I loved hearing planners and Pentagon City Sector Plan in particular, but For steel and concrete to make sense, you are usually, and this is still true, I think, you need to be closer to like 16, 20 stories for it to really start to make sense. When you have those densities, then I don't know that it necessarily anything works right now, but that's why you can see in particular people going forward with like one Rosslyn, for example. Right? I mean, that would never be a stick over concrete building because they could do a 300 foot, 400 foot building there with 30 stories and 10 FAR.
I thought this could go to 16 stories.
12 is the recommendation.
Well,
Sector plan, and I can find out for you if that's a hard cap in the order to afford its flexibility there.
It is. If we could, 16 would be interesting, but I can't, give you a pro forma quote off the top of my head. I'm not even a developer.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this is, so while we are relatively close to Metro, we are not on the top of the hill, right? So the rents here are naturally going to be lower than they are on the top of the hill. And given that fact, we also need the construction costs to be lower, to be commensurate with the fact that the rents are going to be lower. And I think from an overall planning perspective, that's probably good, right? Because we're getting variety in the level of rents. They don't all need to be what they are at the Cortland or at Central Place, since we're down here at the bottom of the hill. But we need the construction costs to also come down to be proportional to those rents coming down.
The Commodore has been very successful in leasing up, but it's a 20-story steel and concrete building, plus units directly on top of a metro station. It's a different project.
Oh, okay. We have somebody online that wanted to address this subject.
Yes, this is Elizabeth with the Disability Advisory Commission. I would like to ask if at this point you guys anticipate having to waive any of the disability, either ADA or higher Arlington County plans for accessible units, width of sidewalks, and those types of features at this point.
Our units are all accessible. We actually had a challenge with our main entrance. So basically we took a lot of care about accessibility. We have a lift like in the lobby because there was a 3-foot difference between the sidewalk and our ground floor. So and it's exactly next to the main door. So we it's totally accessible. Like we have 2 entrances, one with the lift, the other one secondary entrance on Queen. It meets the grade. I think it has just a 12-foot ramp because it was 1-foot difference. And all the units are designed by all the clearances that are required for Fair Housing Act. So.
And with affordable units, we usually negotiate some type A units and write those into site plan conditions, but those are affordable units.
Yep.
And then we have percentage of NC units that all goes with by recommendation.
I think the only thing we can't change is the sidewalk elevations running along the site.
Yeah, we cannot. But that's why we provided actually the recess entrance that accommodates now the building main entrances are connected with accessible route, which is impossible with existing streets.
And you're not anticipating having to lower amounts of disability parking as a result of the parking issues you may face?
I mean, we are just doing as required, like as many affordable, like in these parking spaces, the garage actually slopes all the time, but these spaces are totally next to the elevators and they're on horizontal.
I think you got to provide whatever the law says for the number.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so we have ADA parking spaces as would be required right next to the elevators.
Yeah, and handicap van space.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, but nothing above the ADA requirements. I mean, I know that the Arlington plan would seek to have, say, more units available? I mean, it sounds like you are doing just the basic ADA requirements. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it just rounded up to the lower numbers, so yes, it's
Okay.
correct. It's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from anyone online? Before we move on to the, Tinley.
Yeah, so the slice of land that the county is going to sell you, if the county wasn't gonna sell you that, could you still do the project?
Probably not.
Because it looks like a pretty small slice of land.
It is, it would be interesting, right? I mean, it would cut the building back even further and the whole thing would be odd, right? Because then we would also push back significantly from the street, which would not comply with the sector plan either, right?
Theoretically, I'm thinking that little triangle slice could be green space.
Oh,
And we originally did have green space on Fairfax and staff suggested that they wanted a solid street wall.
does the sector plan would require?
Yeah, it's one of the balances we have to do. Yeah, that's our guidance. Yes.
But yeah, that slice is going to become. I mean, that's the sidewalk, that's the streetscape and part of the building. Because we obviously are not going to move into the street, right, to build the sidewalk and narrow Fairfax even further. So we have to build that in that space.
And part of this is, most of this is happening to the east, but it begins on our side. Fairfax Drive is being slightly realigned so that on the south side, the multi-use trail can become wider and more usable than it currently is. I mean, it gets squeezed right here between Fairfax and Arlington Boulevard. So part of this between our site and the site to the east is improving that trail. And the county has a whole plan for doing that.
And there were, I won't say intense, but there were vigorous discussions on everything involving all of that, including lane widths, sidewalk widths, et cetera, both on this side and on the red line. But if you're out there, we were out there today on the walking tour. I mean, the existing pathway is not safe and not good. So that county project that is being accommodated by both of these projects, I think, is going to be very well.
Jim, how does this project and what's being proposed to comply with the open space requirements compare to the Red Lion site? Because the Red Lion site, there was an issue with that too, as to what sort of green would be allowed, the biophilic elements, put those together. I had a pretty big discussion, and then you had a number of things that they came up with that ended up being acceptable. I think it would be a good idea to go back and compare the two to see whether this is pretty much, to what degree this is similar to what is now in the Red Lion site.
It's substantially better, but the difference is that Red Line has no sector plan governing or area plan or similar
Yeah,
plan
it's
governing
across
it.
the street and outside the boundary.
It's outside of the Rosslyn sector plan. It's outside of, right,
It's not considered to be a planned area.
I mean, it's planned it as much as it had the general land use plan.
No, but it's outside of
Red
what
Line
we-
was outside of any guidance of the Rosslyn
Right, that's-
sector plan and outside the Fort Myers.
The fact
It's
that-
one of those in the no man's land.
But I still think it'd be worthwhile to take a look at it
I
because they did come up with a number of ideas, which we thought, oh, that's pretty good.
we had some beautiful landscaping project in some of the above grade spaces in particular. And I do think that we're accomplishing some of that with the terrace here. And we could certainly, show the renderings again and talk a little bit about the plannings, but like generally speaking, I can get into this a little bit since you raised it, but like Yasna has some exhibits that show, the amount of green that we've been able to place kind of throughout the site to try to comply with this. We have just over 8.5 feet on the eastern side of landscaped private open space. That didn't come out of a vacuum. There were discussions with staff last time about something to honor this intention from the plan on that side of the site. It's been 2 years. Staff has every right to look at things again, et cetera, and have this whole discussion with us again. I just note that didn't come out of nowhere. We did move the building to accommodate that. We made shifts to accommodate for it. Quite frankly, the very, very beginning when we had an early meeting with staff, it wasn't even there. The necessity of this landscaped open space was not a priority. it has become one to some extent. That's fine.
I mean,
But the only other thing I wanted to add, Jim, is just that, it is the open space that was called for was intended to mimic the garden apartment aesthetic to the north, because if some of those garden apartments weren't preserved, then they wanted to see that. There were some garden apartments preserved up to the north behind Union Queen. I think that we're honoring it with what we're doing. I think that it's very difficult to both have a street wall on Fairfax and have a garden apartment aesthetic on Pierce, and then do everything else that we've been asked to do. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, the site is very tiny. We need virtually every square foot of leasable area we can get to give this project a chance of succeeding. And so it is very, very, very difficult for us to do any more, right?
I mean, the stepped green on Pierce, I think actually looks pretty good, and walking next to it would be a very pleasant experience. We have something sort of like that in Ballston, where the affordable building with the cemetery plot is there. Because I think the building goes over those graves. I could be wrong, you might want to check on that, but the one that just opened, you know, it was one of the very first site plans I ever dealt with.
Yeah, that's our building, yeah. Ballston, Ballston Station.
Yeah.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, because they had to come, people were very creative to deal with, which they weren't going to move the graves to honor those. So, you know, check on those.
It's a family
Oh,
called
there's also a
historic cemetery.
historic district
Right,
too.
Wall Cemetery.
So that was like to the inch, we got the area that's.
Right, but I think they also had to go over it a little bit.
It's like, yeah, like the building was, it's over, it's like a European arcades.
Yeah,
Right here, like in Italy, you can see that.
right. So, I mean, and that is open space. So this doesn't offend me as an idea for open space. The tree that you have on top of the, in the middle for the second story, is it going to be, is there deep enough soil there to support a tree like that?
I love that you asked that, because we had this discussion internally with our group.
It's a big planter. It's a kind of 42-inch high, and it's a big triangle. And it's like our landscape architect is here. So you can talk about this central tree on the main terrace.
I mean, you had the picture of it up there.
Yeah. So basically behind that, you have like patios for the units.
Right.
So there's enough, is there enough dirt? I think it's.
Yeah, we're providing significant, enough depth of dirt there that's for a standard tree planter on roof deck, and it's a smaller flowering tree, so it's like.
But the tree that you had in the rendering there, that is the type of tree that would survive in a planter of that size?
I'm not quite sure what tree they've actually shown, but yeah.
Yeah, when you pull that up.
Oh, no, that's not the tree, that we're doing like a smaller flowering tree.
That's artistic.
Well, we really like to have renderings that reflect reality, because we've been burned in the past by renderings that ended up not being anywhere near what is actually done.
Sorry, David, but
David has his hand raised. He's the lead. Go ahead, David.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, what I was gonna say is that tree we're planting there is a redbud, so it is a little bit smaller than that. It is the flowering tree, like Tyler said. It's actually good for pollination. It's a good bird habitat, butterfly habitat tree as well. So it will be a little bit smaller than what's being shown right there.
Correct that rendering.
What side of the building is this? The front or the rear?
Is that the residential?
It's
Terrace.
the south side of the,
South.
so faces.
In the center.
Yeah.
It's the terrace, essentially.
And the redbud is a little bit more of an understory tree as well. So shade is you can tolerate a little bit of shade.
Because partly what we like, if we're going to be having above ground, and this is 2 stories up, is something that could actually be seen from somewhere on the ground.
It's top of the 3rd floor. It's on the 4th floor.
Or it is
And that's required by zoning. Setback.
And I would say that we are very open to exploring any creative thoughts or additional plannings that could work within the entirety of this sort of structure as we've planned out to help honor those intentions.
Right, and that's why I'm saying check with Red Lion, because they did come up with a number of ideas that we thought, oh yeah, that looks pretty decent.
I will ensure that.
They're good ideas.
Good idea.
But yeah, anything like goes over the side.
I just want to emphasize right now that as forester staff do not think that the current application meets any of the tree canopy requirements of the Chesapeake.
Yeah,
Bay.
we're prepared to speak to that. Do you want us to answer now?
Where is that next?
You can answer now if you want.
Yeah, okay, so we took a close look at this, because this is in the latest set of comments. And, you know, David's on, and he looked at all the calculations for it, et cetera. We also have a backup exhibit we should pull up, because I want to show how the trees interact with the canopy on the front of the building as well, because that was something that was brought up.
So it's coming.
Okay, wonderful. So yes, we feel like we can comply with Chesapeake Bay requirements. I want to say that we absolutely do, but I'm leaving space for us to talk to the forestry staff and ensure that we're on the same page with what's counting and what doesn't before I promise you that we do.
We'll be able to have answers for that by the next SPRC.
Exactly. And it will be vetted with staff at that point.
Okay, so we don't
two
have to-
things on the trees, like we think that we meet the canopy coverage with the existing trees that we have in the plan right now. B, we would love to talk with staff about the potential to add another 1 to 2 street trees. It would require a tighter spacing between those trees than is normally accepted, but we think we can fit the soil volumes in. So we could probably squeeze another tree or 2 in there, but we need to talk through that with staff to ensure that they also agree that they can survive.
And there's no utility issues under these sidewalks.
There's tons of utility issues, but we think we can work through it.
Because that came up on one of the other ones along here.
Problem,
One or two.
the problem is there's also getting the canopy from the trees and the building canopy itself.
Yeah, Jess, can you help us zoom in on
some of these upgrades? So that's
the offender really is, okay. We're trying to zoom in. The offender is this tree that's right near the entrance canopy. That's the one that's closest. And once we get the exhibit up and can zoom in on the tree that I'm talking about, you'll be able to see that full growth. The canopy is kind of just touching it. And what I understand from our team is that we can't count for canopy purposes stuff that is blocked or impeded by the building, but we can count the rest of the canopy. So there's about 60 square feet of canopy that we lose because of that projection of that portion of the building, which is a canopy of the building.
And that's cumulative. And also, Nick, that's cumulative. That's not just this specific tree. It's the other trees that are on Fairfax as well.
Canopy. Okay.
Yeah. So it's more. The other trees are included in that 60 square feet we lose.
Okay. Anything else that you thought that I should note here as we were just discussing this issue?
One comment was made about the vertical clearances above the trees, and if you can see in all of the sections that the center of the tree is not impeded whatsoever by any overhead structures. And the structure and the trees that are being shown right there are the trees at the 20-year growth level for these specific trees, which is what is used for the Chesapeake Bay calculations. So visually, this is what the trees will look like at 20 years. And you can see in some areas like on Fairfax, there's like a couple of feet in some instances, and a couple of feet on Queen. And I think we're okay on, I'm sorry, Pierce, we're a little bit into the canopy, but on Queen, I think we're good to go. But again, meeting, if we can count these trees, the street trees as for our canopy coverage, we definitely meet the canopy coverage and the soil volumes.
Yeah.
For those trees.
What we'll do is we're going to essentially reach consensus with staff that, we agree on these things, and then come back to you and tell you whether or not we actually comply or, make changes such that we do. So we'll be working on that.
I'll just say, if the current site layout doesn't match the area plan and is not pleasing to our forestry and natural resource staff and commission, I would not feel comfortable with the site layout as is. But if Forestry Natural Resources Commission and our staff feel that our tree canopy requirements are going to be met, I'm still feeling a little uncomfortable that it doesn't match the area plan, and this neighborhood has so little open green space. We'll see what the next meeting looks like.
Commissioner Stripe.
I just want to associate this with those comments. DJ is landscape architects.
Yeah, DJ, you want to say something in additional about this issue?
Okay.
Nope. The hand went down.
Eric Goodman.
It's just me, David with Studio 39.
Okay. Joan McIntyre has her hand up, I thought. Joan?
Yeah. Yeah, again, since we're on the tree canopy is, yeah, it is kind of, kind of somewhat disturbing that, the level of tree canopy coverage is pretty low for this site. And also kind of looking, the strips seem to be very relatively narrow. Is that really going to have enough soil volume in order to support large canopy trees? And then are you looking too in terms of urban heat island and doing an estimate in terms of what the urban heat island impact is on this area? What kind of temperatures would likely to expect given its general layout? And I did notice that at least one of the trees seems to be a ginkgo, which is not a native tree. So again, all trees should be native trees, and to the extent possible, they actually should be straight natives rather than cultivars.
Yeah, Eric Goodman.
Yes, I just wanted to say, as far as trees go, since you're talking about them, just to make certain that they're appropriate, being so close to the sidewalk, you don't want to have heaving of the sidewalk and causing problems. So I think that the trees should be chosen very carefully to make sure that over the life of the tree, we're not going to have issues like that.
Or that we're designing it to make sure that the trees actually have enough room to grow the way that we want to and produce at least some semblance of a tree canopy coverage.
Yeah, so what we're looking at on this is we do have a 5-foot landscape strip. It's a continuous strip on all of the streets, which gives us a good soil volume going that direction. And also underneath the sidewalks, we're putting in like a silvocell kind of situation where for the roots of the trees to go in, my understanding the structural soil is not accepted anymore for the county, but these are proven to be very beneficial for urban trees. So survivability of the tree, I think, will be good to go. We definitely meet the soil volume requirements for the specific trees that we have called out right now. The ginkgos over on Pierce and Queen, they are not native. We chose those specific trees in those locations because of the trees that were on the Union, which is just like it's planned north of us. And those are autumn gold ginkgos right now. We wanted to just match that for continuity for the street. We can look at changing those to a native tree, like a black gum or something like that, to get all of the street trees native, which would work. But also let you know that on the list of non-native species that are allowed that aren't invasive, ginkgo is on the list and it is checked off as a street tree, acceptable tree. So that's one of the reasons we also kept it as ginkgos for those roads. But we can definitely look at more natives.
I do want to say that I think that the focus a little bit on tree canopy specifically is probably fair. And so we can continue to look at that and hopefully come back with something that, A, we can tell you staff agrees with us that we meet the tree canopy requirements of the Chesapeake Bay ordinance, but also perhaps find some more spaces for trees and show how they're going to survive. That could be something that works here.
I wanted to ask how much of the rooftop was going to be a green rooftop. What percentage of it, roughly?
10%.
Sorry, 10?
20.
20%. And are there elements up there that prohibit you from making that larger?
So I think this was actually, it's going to be used for retention, and it is calculated how much needed. But again, I think David talked about it. Then we just have mechanical equipment on the roof.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, terrace is not going to be occupied for use, it's available.
We had previously looked at an active use up there, which Red Lion had as well. And unfortunately, building code has changed such that it's state-built structure. You cannot put an active use on the roof anymore. That's not true everywhere. I think that in DC you probably still can. And it's just the place we're in right now with code, construction types, and where the market leads us to for construction types. But so that's sort of.
Just to elaborate, actually, you can, but it triggers the high-rise package.
At that point, you
Yeah,
might as well
exactly.
build a steel.
They just think you cannot build anything higher than 4 feet on the roof. So that's when you create the canopy, you have to kind of comply with higher rise package, and that's expensive. And we are sorry, we really wanted we had to change design again.
Our discussion of land use and density has sort of naturally worked its way into site design and layout and open space and landscaping. Are there any other questions in either of those two categories that we want to discuss before moving on to building platform and architecture? Anyone online with concerns about land use and density or site design and layout? And obviously, those of you still waiting online will have a chance for public comment, we'll have a chance to address those at the end of the meeting. All right, then building height, form, and architecture. Questions or concerns on any of those issues?
I'll always say, they fully explained it. I'd always rather take advantage of the height. That's allowed. But at least here, you've gone up the extra story. So instead of a 5/2, it's a 5/3. So yay, that's.
And I think that we all wish that things were a little bit different in that sense too. I mean, it's a common theme right now throughout the county, and I would love to see more housing. I'm a huge proponent of the supply, solution to this housing crisis.
And that was the online engagement, that comment, that in general, there was a desire for more housing, that certainly came up.
The other thing that we talked about I was on the walking tour, there's a certain amount of overhangs. Personally, they don't particularly bother me. It depends on how does it look and how does it work with the interaction with the street. Here, they're high up enough. One of them is fairly small. I don't see it's a big deal. What I don't like is when the building looks like it's too big for the site. I don't think that's really true here. The overhang is fairly minor. So that's something personally I can live with, but that's, up to staff and you to argue that.
But it's not the overstuffed sausage.
Right.
They're about 2 feet. They would hang over essentially building shy zone. They don't get into the clear sidewalk or anything like that. And I don't believe that they even interfere with the tree canopy. I think that was separate.
And having walked the site now, across the street on Pierce, there's an overhang. The apartment building there, Park Rosslyn has an overhang. It's like,
Are we talking about overhangs or canopies?
no, it's an overhang.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's an overhang because it goes right up.
Is the overhang structurally necessary or is it decorative?
Now, it is actually needed to accommodate the units on those floors. They will be totally cut off. If you respected the podium, it cuts the whole living room out of the corner unit.
And so you guys would be getting an easement over that part of the sidewalk.
So,
That's what public right
Actually, if it's over 16 feet of sidewalk easement, they actually don't need an encroachment, is my understanding. Don't quote me 100% on that.
It starts up pretty high.
He's correct, because we had to look at it, because there's the long discussion here about, okay, how much are we vacating? What does that turn the underlying property interest to, et cetera? But the county adopted an encroachment ordinance, I want to say a year or two ago, that is updated and that has resolved a lot of issues that used to be a project-specific discussion in a constructive way. So if you're a certain height above the property interest below, and that property interest is not a street, then you don't need an encroachment. And generally speaking, from a legal perspective, those features are fine. It then comes into an urban design question and whether or not, like Mr. Lantelmi was saying, it's, you know, looks like the building's spilling out, if it's interfering with pedestrians, if it's casting shadows, et cetera. Everything here comes back to the theme of how difficult it is to build a building on this site. And the overhangs help finish out those units in a way that they can work. If we don't have that, the units become substandard, or they begin to lose space, and this whole thing starts to unravel pretty quickly, which is just the unfortunate challenge we're dealing with the shape of the site, the size of it.
So if I can ask a follow on, do DES staff have concerns with like the utilities, or it would make it more complicated to work on street repairs, or for a fire truck to get access where they needed to go, or to like repair power lines or sewer lines? Is there some issues that the county is now taking on added risk by this overhang?
We'll take that on. No, we haven't identified any issues. There was one potentially on the southeast corner of the site, but it's been reviewed by staff, particularly for like a future signal or some type of like crossing mechanism. But you know, it's not programmed anywhere in our CIP, and there's already some crossings that will be brought by the trail project, but they will not be at that corner.
Nailed the policy purpose behind those site minimums too. That's exactly what it's for. And that's why before the encroachment ordinance, it was an unwritten if you were 16 and a half feet or above, you generally didn't need an encroachment, but also, you know, that was the height needed in part just to be able to service anything below. So if you did anything lower than that, it was pretty much just not allowed because of those concerns with utilities.
Other questions? Commissioner Strider.
Got another comment. I'm with Commissioner Antelmi on this one. I don't think the overhangs are a showstopper for me. And I'd like to say that this is a very challenging site. I've walked past this site for years, fence around, and I've always wondered how they're gonna make this work.
It's not your graffiti. Is it?
No. But I like the design. I like the way it looks. I think the connections to the motel are a little abstract, but and that's fine with me. I think it looks. I like the look of the site. I like the way that it fits on this on 50 here. I think as you were mentioning earlier, you know, when cars drive past this thing at 45, 50 miles an hour, they're going to look at it and they'll be like, oh, that looks pretty good. And it will certainly look better than what is there now, which has been an abandoned motel that's been abandoned as long as I've been, you know, so.
That's not that long.
Exactly. It's not that long.
It's a mini Keybridge Marriott in some ways, because it is an attractive nuisance. It is attracting the graffiti artists. I already had a year ago or so, I had a detective call because trying to get in touch with the owners because they actually got a guy who had done something graffiti and posted on social media. But it would be great to see this replaced with something nice and useful that is safe and welcoming.
It struck me the old motel really is a mid-century modern design, not really Art Deco.
Yeah,
It's mid-century modern.
it is true. That's why the area plans were mostly concerned with the architectural compatibility of the garden apartments from the 40s. So
Right. So this is mid-century modern.
I agree. I think I understand that you're working with several design influences and trying to blend those together. I think generally you've done a really good job. I think it ties in nicely to several of the contexts like you mentioned, and does a wonderful job of kind of capturing that highway experience, especially for the highway hotel. I like how you've broken that plane that does something new and interesting and gestures to the Route 50 or the 50 hotel, but at least from a historic, that's from a design perspective, but from an HLRB perspective, I think we'd like to see a little bit more tangible conservation or preservation. I like the nod to the panel, the floating signs, but it is really abstract. It is, and I think that you've done a great job pulling in the railings. I think there's little details. Even the Art Deco references are a little bit surface level. It's very ornamental. And I understand that to bring it too deep in, it kind of creates a chimera, but I think it's going to be challenging for HLRB to see that we're losing something off the historic resources inventory and not see kind of a dedicated, tangible effort to preserve something. I know we've talked about maybe preserving the lobby or some of the materials. But right now I'm seeing this is, it's a good effort, but I don't know that's gonna be enough to convince HLRB.
I think we're probably expecting that. There are things we can do to help honor the historic heritage here that may not be, you know, in the building itself, just given the challenges with that.
Sure.
But we'd also be open to any concrete suggestions that we can vet at a minimum.
Sure.
You know, we've looked at preserving existing materials. We've looked at, I mean, there's not, I don't know that there's anything with preserving the existing building we haven't looked into. Given it's been 3+ years of design on this project, but we're open to any suggestions at a minimum.
Right. I think number one that comes to mind is definitely reinforcing that Route 50 sign. I think it is a little abstract. Yeah, that would be nice.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Eric Goodman.
So I have a question that kind of sort of bridges site design and form, and that is, you talked about dwelling units, which I'm not really that familiar with. Are these actually open to the street, or are they what is actually meant by dwelling units? And if they are open to the street, do they have any interaction with the sidewalk?
Dwelling unit just means apartment. That's kind of a land use technical term to just mean, because that's a term that comes out of the zoning ordinance. And it just means a housing unit. A dwelling unit could be a home, it could be an apartment, it could be a condo, it could be a townhome. So we have those units along the bottom floor, and at least one of them has direct access to the sidewalk.
Yes, one.
Just one. One at the corner doesn't have access to the lobby, so it has access to the sidewalk.
Yeah, which is again an interesting feature of just the challenge with this site, because that was really the only way to make effective use of that corner of the building once we laid everything else out.
And admittedly, it's good urban design too, if you have ground level units to try to have individual entrances.
Yeah.
Our problem is that the ground floor is elevated over the sidewalk. So that corner unit actually was the only one that was close to the, because of the slope of Queen, it actually met the grading. You know, and then there are still steps, but there are both, like you can come in.
It won't constrain the sidewalk though at all there, right?
Correct. We had to provide
Yeah.
the sidewalk minimums.
Yeah.
That was a big deal as we were designing and meeting with staff.
It was pushed in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Any other discussion? Tinley?
So I'll just note, can we pull up the picture of it?
Yes.
Are there 5 or 6 different building materials on the facade?
We have a slide that specifically goes over some materials. So we can pull that up. That's
I
what
mean, I
that
think it looks
slides.
like kind of cool and funky, but then I remember, and I'm not an architect or a designer, I remember in past meetings, some of my colleagues would be like, that's too much, it's too much chaos. I mean, I think it kind of looks funky and cool, but I just wanted to.
So it's basically, there is this is the detail of the elevation. Like, so you can see on the front elevation, we have this peach color brick that actually goes around the corner, and it transfers to this very warm architectural paneling, which is going to be wood-like. And then the main other material is white masonry wall that are slice walls. And then at the site elevations, so basically, I don't think we have 5 different materials. If you count so that's the bay window.
So yeah, here's the white masonry.
Yeah.
This is the brick. And
Yeah, so these are 2 elements along Fairfax. Like it's a brick.
Yeah, it looks like white, wood, dark gray.
I'm on 10 this level.
Brick.
Like I just look at the columns.
So 1, 2, 3, 4 there.
4, okay. And the brick matches the garden apartment color?
At the motel, yes.
Hotel.
Okay.
Hotel. So, but then it's kind of around the corner. It's again very monochromatic building. Like we can go to the elevations. It's hard to navigate. It's really monochromatic. You can see, like, so this is the back elevation. This is front elevation. That little corner on the lower elevation, it's actually the red, again, peach brick. So we don't like using too many different materials, but we did emphasize that bay window because we wanted to get the scale of the neighborhood. Like you have this, like a garden apartment scale, so that's why it's intentionally different.
By the way, I really like the south elevation there on the left side. No, yeah, that one. How the windows get smaller than bigger again. It's a very nice little touch there. Congratulations. I think that is very sophisticated.
We try to make this really great, but then you have bedrooms and then you have living rooms and then you have different requirements.
It just works very nicely.
Thank you. I think it came out nicely.
I think that the count, so we've been working with urban design on this, and Mr. Kreider, I don't think is here today, but he had some thoughts on the design and we responded to a lot of it. We made some improvements with his suggestions. I don't think that the material palette was.
So the only really colorful one is that one on Pierce. So because of the baby, that's one, yeah. It has that bay window as the accent. It's a darker gray. So, and you know, not every screen reflects the colors correctly. It's not that strong, but it does want to have offset the off-white, like siding at the northeast corner.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, the vertical elements are, I think, very necessary for the project.
We wanted, you know, like this is the entrance onto the exit.
Yeah, we always do want to have the entrance be fairly obvious and
it's obvious. And you know, it's hard to create too much of the skyline, but with colors you get some different depth.
What is the thought process? Is it like an antenna or is it something on the edge there? Is it a reference to something or?
Which one?
The design element on the side of the tower here.
The big T.
Yeah, yeah, this is another attempt to make building Art Deco. So it's always like repeating, this is this combination of the off-white masonry and this ornamental metal, which is bronze color.
Right.
So it's very popular, like in Art Deco, maybe we'll see gold color be a little bit subdued.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you,
so I think it works.
I don't know if you heard the full comment. She didn't feel that it was as successful on the Art Deco.
I think that one feels like a little bit like an outlier, not as cohesive with the rest of the
It's too
project.
harsh, I'm sorry.
A little bit, not harsh. It seems out of place compared to the rest.
You know, I think
So
it
maybe
draws
we
the eye
don't
up.
need it. Actually.
I like drawing the eye up. I like the tower. I'm even fine with the different materials. If it's supposed to harken to Art Deco, I don't know that as successful.
Okay,
It's a thought.
so should we try harder or should we eliminate?
Now the county board. We're taking feedback from everyone.
Joe McIntyre, we see your hand is up.
Yeah, I want to ask some questions in terms of kind of to what extent that you're looking at the building orientation in order to kind of take advantage of ambient temperatures, you know, sun positions. I know in one of the potential HVAC systems, they would be using a VRF system that actually would take advantage of, you know, southern exposures that would get warmer both during the winter and summer, and northern exposures that would be cooler, and kind of transferring air temperatures from one part of the building to the other. But beyond that, in terms of, you know, selection of materials that are low carbon that can help reduce the overall life cycle carbon of the building, as well as reflective materials that might reduce the ambient air temperature as part of the building design.
We will give you a detailed answer next time when we're talking about sustainability specifically. For now, I can kind of cover for the team and just say we're doing everything that is required under the 0.25 FAR tier for the lead incentive. But on the specifics, I mean, Josh could maybe note if there's something he knows off the top of his head, but otherwise we'll take that question back.
I mean, when you
And just to lay down a marker is the information currently on the website on sustainability is pretty limited. The energy model is actually interesting because you have several different options for HVAC and estimating range of energy use and carbon emissions. And it looks like it's all electric, but, you know, kind of would want to see that confirmed. But actually what selection, what you're doing and what the implications are and as well EV charging and green roofs and solar and all the other things that come under the green building incentive policy. We'd want to see a lot more details at the
Yep.
next meeting.
I outlined those for the team in long-term prep, so we will make sure that we are ready to answer all of that. Josh, did you want to say something now?
The only thing I was going to say is that with the masonry walls on the south side, they are that light colored masonry. So that is going to reflect some of the solar radiation on the southern side of the building.
We'll get into more detail next time, but we'll be prepared on all of those. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. Tony.
So I want to go back to the brass team. I like it in concept. What's weird about it to me is that it starts halfway through the building. This is my armchair architect perspective. I would say either go all the way with it or not at all with it, because I think when it starts halfway, it just kind of looks a little out of place.
Yes, we tried this way, that way.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not developed enough. It does have, the middle portion, you see. It's a little bit higher. It's not totally simple, but.
Well, you can't see it in the elevation. It does come out. As
Yeah, it comes out and then the central portion comes out. So it's a little bit more detail that is,
So the top is further out than the bottom
Yeah.
is.
Makes it even cooler, but.
But maybe we didn't spend enough time doing it because we were so focusing on all the corners and all that, and then we will revisit. And we will take all these comments seriously.
Yeah. No, I mean, those are fantastic SPRC comments, this sort of stuff.
Yes, Tim.
I wanted to ask about the area plan calling for a step back. Usually when we're talking about a project like this, setbacks are really important to the commission. We don't have one here. So Peter, can you talk about why would the area plan call for the step back, and why do we usually like a building to have a step back? What are we giving up by not having a step back here?
Usually step backs are meant to promote compatibility with surroundings. Clarendon was one where it's felt step backs would help compatibility with neighboring one-story buildings. I think it's just an idea to provide light to the street. I don't believe there's any extended length discussion of why step backs were required on, other than the reference to in the urban design section of this area plan that there should be step backs. I would say that, staff is it's open to the applicant's proposing that as meeting maybe the spirit of it, but combine that with the overhangs too. That was something that we couldn't quite get past. You're going to have overhangs and a step back, not a full step back for the 15 feet, but you can probably see there is a neighboring building that was built across Road Street where I think they have like a 2-step step back. I can't know exactly 15 feet, but we can be flexible on these things if we think other goals are being accomplished. Like we would, if again, they provided us more open space at the ground level, we could certainly work with them to replace that lost FAR with some sort of modified step back to what is otherwise required.
And so since this is, there's no building farther south, you're not worrying about transitioning to a different building. We don't have to worry about shadows because this is south facing. I remember Commissioner Sarli used to talk about the pedestrian experience and how it doesn't quite feel like a sheer cliff. It makes you feel a little bit safer, and that the sidewalk feels more walk on. So I think maybe Mr. Goodman can speak to that from the pedestrian advisory experience, how he feels about that experience. I remember also there would be concerns about like a wind tunnel if you don't have a step back, but that would be an issue here either. I just want to make sure we're kind of fully talking through all of the points about if we're giving up the step back, what is the impact for all of us?
Obviously, there is a substantial, given that sense, it helps, and that you nailed as far as like the policy goals of what these things normally accomplish. I think I will say anecdotally and cheekily, Arlington loves step backs, and we have for 30 years in our sector plans had these wedding cake buildings that constantly stepped back, but we did get away from it. They just cleared an update where there was less, there were fewer step backs imposed, which I would say modern take, which is nice.
Any other issues to discuss? All right, we have one public comment. Bernie Byrne, are you ready? You'll have 2 minutes to address us.
Can you hear me?
We can now, Bernie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The area plan recommends a private open space on this site. However, the applicant is not providing any such space in an effort to maximize its profits. There's essentially no other reasons. This is not acceptable. The February 2025 version of the landscape plan shows only 12 trees, 5 are ginkgos, which are not native. The 7 others are cultivars. Both feed few native pollinators. The Forestry and Natural Resource Plan does not recommend cultivars or non-native trees. None of these trees are acceptable. Furthermore, the rooftop will have sedum. Sedum is usually non-native. The applicant needs to specify what sedums these are, what the species are. The project is neither biophilic nor sustainable. The portion of the roof that is green is much too small. There are no green walls and no solar panels. No plants hang from the roof or climb from the ground. It appears that the southwest corner is too narrow, but you have to check on this. It is difficult to find a less environmentally friendly site plan outside of a metro corridor than this one is. And you really should reject this. This is just no good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Byrne. I think Peter Schultz was just saying that we will have a second SPRC meeting at some point in the future. We'll have some time to address the issues that were raised during this meeting. And we appreciate the involvement of everybody. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.
Thank you.